A janitor? That's who you're bringing to Christmas dinner? My ex-husband Charles said loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. The room fell silent for half a second before laughter spread around the dining room like a ripple across a frozen lake. My daughter Olivia lowered her head, trying and failing to hide her smile. My son Ethan chuckled openly as he reached for another dinner roll. I sat there staring at the candlelight reflecting off the crystal glasses, wondering how the people I had loved most could make humiliation look so effortless. Walter, my fiancé, didn't say a word. He simply smiled. And that smile would change everything before Christmas was over. I'm Margaret Whitmore, 68 years old, and until that night, I thought I had already experienced every kind of disappointment a family could offer. I was wrong. Christmas had always been my favorite holiday. Even after my divorce from Charles 12 years earlier, I still believed the season represented forgiveness, kindness, and second chances. Maybe that's why I accepted Olivia's invitation to attend Christmas dinner at her beautiful suburban home outside Columbus, Ohio. Maybe that's why I convinced myself bringing Walter would help everyone finally see what I saw in him. The house looked like something from a holiday magazine. White lights wrapped around the columns outside. Fresh wreaths hung in every window. The scent of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and baked pecan pie greeted guests as they arrived. Everything looked perfect. Everything except the people sitting around the table. From the moment Walter and I walked through the front door, I felt the shift in the room. Conversations paused. Eyes lingered. Smiles seemed forced. Olivia hugged me politely before turning her attention elsewhere. Ethan shook Walter's hand, but barely looked at him. Charles, meanwhile, studied Walter the way someone might inspect a stain on a new carpet. Walter handled it all with the same quiet dignity that had first drawn me to him. At 69, he carried himself with calm confidence. He never tried to impress people. He never boasted. He never cared what anyone thought about his profession. For nearly 20 years, he had worked as a facilities supervisor and occasionally filled in as a janitor when needed. He took pride in honest work. I admired that. Unfortunately, my family measured people differently. They measured success by luxury cars, investment portfolios, and vacation homes. Charles had spent decades teaching our children that status mattered more than character. I didn't realize how deeply that lesson had taken root until that Christmas dinner. The meal began pleasantly enough. Small talk, holiday stories, discussions about travel plans and grandchildren. Then Charles asked Walter what he did for a living. Walter answered honestly. The moment the word janitor left his mouth, Charles leaned back in his chair and laughed. What followed felt less like a family dinner and more like a performance designed to embarrass us. Joke after joke, comment after comment, each one a little sharper than the last. And every time the laughter erupted, I felt another piece of my heart break. Yet Walter remained calm. He smiled. He listened. He even wished everyone a Merry Christmas. Sitting beside him, I couldn't understand how he stayed so composed. Looking back now, I realized something important. Walter wasn't staying silent because he was hurt. He was staying silent because he knew something nobody else in that room knew. And by the end of the holiday, the people laughing the hardest would become the ones struggling to look him in the eye. That night, after the laughter finally faded and dessert plates were cleared away, I found myself standing alone beside Olivia's kitchen window. Outside, fresh snow had begun to fall, covering the backyard in a blanket of white. The soft glow from the patio lights reflected across the snow, making everything appear peaceful. I wished I felt the same. Instead, I felt a familiar ache settling into my chest. It was not only because of what had happened at dinner. It was because I had seen something I had spent years trying not to notice. My children were becoming more like their father with every passing year. As I watched the snow drift down, memories of the years after my divorce returned to me. When Charles and I separated, I told myself I was finally free. Free from the criticism. Free from the constant pressure to impress people who never seemed satisfied. Yet freedom came with loneliness. For the first time in decades, I woke up alone. I drank my morning coffee alone. I ate dinner alone. The house felt larger than ever. Every room echoed with silence. Olivia and Ethan were adults by then, busy building their own lives. They called occasionally. They visited on holidays. But something had changed. The closeness we once shared slowly faded. I kept telling myself it was normal. Children grow up. Families change. Still, some evenings felt longer than others. Then, 3 years ago, Walter entered my life. I met him at a community fundraiser organized by a local church. I remember noticing him because he was helping stack folding chairs after everyone else had already gone home. He was wearing work boots and a faded jacket. Nothing about him demanded attention. Yet there was a kindness in the way he spoke to people. He listened carefully. He remembered names. He treated every person with the same respect. Over time, we became friends. Friendship turned into companionship. Companionship turned into something deeper. Walter never tried to impress me with expensive gifts or grand gestures. Instead, he fixed a loose porch railing. He brought soup when I caught the flu. He called simply to ask how my day had gone. Those small acts meant more than anything money could buy. Yet whenever my children learned more about him, their reactions grew colder. At first they asked polite questions. Then the questions became judgments. What kind of retirement savings did he have? Did he own property? Why had he worked the same profession for so long? I could hear Charles in every one of those questions. Success, in their minds, had become something measured only by bank accounts and job titles. They never asked whether Walter was honest. They never asked whether he was kind. They never asked whether he made me happy. Standing there in Olivia's kitchen, I realized how long I had been making excuses for them. I had blamed busy schedules. I had blamed adulthood. I had blamed distance. But perhaps the truth was simpler. Perhaps they had stopped seeing people for who they were. Across the room, I noticed Walter helping Olivia carry serving dishes to the sink. He smiled as he thanked her. She barely acknowledged him. Yet his expression never changed. He seemed completely unaffected by the coldness surrounding him. A few minutes later, he walked over and gently touched my arm. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "I am just tired." He looked at me for a moment as though he knew there was more I wanted to say. Then he smiled. It was the same calm smile he had worn all evening. The same smile he wore when Charles mocked him. The same smile he wore when my children laughed. At the time, I believed that smile came from patience. I would soon discover it came from something else entirely. The evening continued long after dinner ended. Christmas music played softly through hidden speakers while guests gathered in small groups around the living room. Some chatted near the fireplace. Others admired the towering tree covered in ornaments collected over decades. From a distance, everything looked warm and festive. Up close, however, I could still feel the tension lingering beneath every conversation. Charles seemed determined to remain the center of attention. Every story somehow circled back to one of his business achievements, one of his investments, or one of the expensive trips he had taken over the years. Olivia and Ethan listened with admiration that bordered on devotion. It reminded me of countless family gatherings from the past, gatherings where appearances mattered more than substance. Walter spent most of the evening speaking with other guests. He asked questions. He listened carefully. Within minutes, complete strangers seemed comfortable around him. Watching him move through the room, I noticed something that had escaped me before. People naturally gravitated toward him, not because he was loud, not because he demanded attention. Quite the opposite. He made people feel seen. Around 9 o'clock, I stepped into the hallway looking for my coat. The house had become warm from the fireplace and the crowd. As I walked past the home office near the front entrance, I noticed the door was slightly open. Inside, someone was speaking quietly. At first I paid little attention. Then I heard Walter's voice. I paused. He sounded different. Not colder exactly, but more formal than usual. "Yes, I reviewed the final numbers this morning," he said. A brief silence followed. "No, I agree. The acquisition timeline should remain unchanged." I frowned. Acquisition? Through the narrow opening, I could see Walter standing beside the desk with his phone pressed to his ear. His expression remained calm. "The board meeting can proceed after the holiday," he continued. "We will discuss the transition plan next week." Board meeting. Transition plan. None of it sounded remotely connected to the man my family believed they knew. Before I could hear more, footsteps approached from behind me. I quickly moved away. A few minutes later, Walter joined me near the Christmas tree, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You disappeared," he said with a smile. I accepted the cup and studied him carefully. "Who were you talking to?" His eyes met mine. For a brief moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Then he smiled again. "Work matters. Work matters on Christmas Eve?" I asked gently. He chuckled. "Sometimes responsibilities do not follow holiday schedules." I waited for him to explain further. He did not. Across the room, Charles suddenly burst into laughter at one of his own jokes. Several guests joined in. Walter glanced toward him, but showed no reaction. That calmness puzzled me more than ever. Most people would have felt hurt after the evening he endured. Yet Walter seemed completely at peace. As the night drew closer to an end, guests began collecting coats and exchanging holiday wishes. Olivia hugged me goodbye. Ethan shook Walter's hand with visible reluctance. Charles offered one final smug smile before leaving. "Try not to work too hard cleaning offices next year," he said. Walter simply nodded. "Merry Christmas, Charles." After everyone departed, the house finally grew quiet. Snow continued falling outside. Walter and I sat alone in the living room beside the fading fire. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Then I looked directly at him. "There is something you are not telling me." The flames reflected in his eyes as he leaned back in his chair. Instead of denying it, he smiled. "You are right." My heart quickened. "Then tell me." He looked toward the dark window for a moment before answering. "Tomorrow morning, Margaret. Just trust me until tomorrow morning." Sleep did not come easily that night. Walter's words stayed with me long after the house had gone quiet. "Tomorrow morning. Just trust me until tomorrow morning." I lay awake in the guest bedroom staring at the ceiling while snow tapped softly against the window. Part of me felt curious. Another part felt uneasy. For 3 years, Walter had been open about nearly everything. Yet now he was asking me to wait for answers. Around 6 o'clock the next morning, I gave up on sleep and quietly made my way downstairs. The house was still dark. The Christmas tree glowed in the corner of the living room, its lights reflecting across the polished hardwood floor. I started a pot of coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the sunrise slowly brighten the snowy neighborhood. The world outside looked peaceful. Inside my mind, questions continued to multiply. By 7 o'clock, Walter appeared wearing a dark winter coat and carrying a folder under one arm. He looked rested, calm, completely untroubled. "Good morning," he said as though nothing unusual had happened. I poured him a cup of coffee. "You are leaving?" He nodded. "For a few hours." I glanced at the folder. "Work matters again." A small smile appeared on his face. Something like that. Before I could ask another question, his phone rang. Walter looked at the screen before answering. "Good morning, David." He listened for several seconds. "Yes, everything is ready. We will meet there at 9. Another pause followed. "The board has already confirmed attendance?" "Excellent. Board." There was that word again. I pretended to focus on my coffee while listening carefully. "No," Walter continued. "I do not anticipate any problems. The documents have been reviewed. We move forward today." After ending the call, he slipped the phone into his pocket. I studied him quietly. "You have mentioned a board more than once now." He smiled. "I have. And acquisitions." Another smile. "That too." "Walter, are you ever going to explain any of this?" For the first time, he seemed to consider his answer carefully. Then he stepped closer and gently squeezed my hand. "Very soon." An hour later, Olivia came downstairs. Ethan followed shortly after. Both looked surprised to find Walter preparing to leave. "Working on Christmas Day?" Ethan asked with a smirk. "That sounds rough." Walter remained polite. "Not all opportunities follow holiday schedules." Olivia exchanged a glance with her brother. Neither seemed impressed. In fact, they looked almost amused. Watching them, I felt a familiar disappointment. Walter had shown them nothing but kindness, yet they continued viewing him through the narrow lens of his job title. Just before Walter walked out the front door, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. A black luxury sedan stopped near the curb. The driver stepped out and hurried toward the house, carrying a leather briefcase. Through the window, I watched him greet Walter with immediate respect. Not friendliness. Respect. The kind of respect people show someone in authority. The two men spoke briefly before entering the vehicle. Then they drove away. Ethan noticed it too. "Interesting," he muttered. Olivia shrugged. "Probably some maintenance company thing." Yet neither sounded fully convinced. Hours passed slowly after that. Family members relaxed in the living room. Gifts were opened. Breakfast dishes were cleaned. But my thoughts remained fixed on Walter. Every strange phone call, every unanswered question, every moment of confidence he had displayed while others mocked him. Looking back, I realized that was the morning everything began to shift. The pieces were already moving into place. None of us could see the full picture yet. But by the end of that day, the assumptions that had defined my family for years were about to collapse one by one. Shortly after noon, Walter called. His voice sounded calm as always, but there was a quiet excitement beneath it that I had never heard before. I need you to meet me somewhere at 3 o'clock, he said. Bring Olivia, Ethan, and if possible, Charles. I stared at the phone for a moment after he ended the call. The request made little sense. Yet something told me this was the moment he had been preparing for. Convincing the others proved surprisingly easy. Charles immediately assumed the invitation was connected to some small maintenance contract or retirement project. Ethan seemed curious. Olivia simply wanted answers. By 2:30, we were all driving through downtown Columbus beneath a gray winter sky. Snow from the previous night still lined the streets. Christmas decorations hung from lamp posts while shoppers hurried between stores carrying colorful bags. The closer we got to our destination, the more confused I became. Walter had texted an address I did not recognize. When we finally arrived, I found myself staring at a large modern conference center overlooking the river. Several luxury vehicles were already parked outside. Men and women dressed in business attire moved through the entrance carrying briefcases and folders. Charles frowned immediately. "Are you sure this is the right place?" he asked. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. A simple message appeared. "Come inside." We entered together. The lobby was enormous, decorated with elegant holiday displays and towering Christmas trees covered in white lights. Near the reception desk stood a large digital screen displaying the name of an organization I had never heard Walter mention before, Hayes National Facility Services. Beneath the company name appeared a welcome message for executives, board members, and invited guests. Ethan stopped walking. "Hayes," he said quietly. My heart skipped a beat. Walter's last name was Hayes. We followed signs leading toward a grand ballroom. The closer we got, the more unusual everything felt. Employees greeted arriving guests with obvious professionalism. Several people carried folders marked confidential. Others spoke about financial projections, expansion plans, and acquisition strategies. None of it matched the image my family had created of Walter. Then everything changed. As we approached the ballroom entrance, a woman in a navy business suit immediately recognized Walter's photograph on the guest list in her hand. She looked up and smiled. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked. "Yes. Mr. Hayes asked us to escort you and your family to the front row." "Front row?" Charles blinked. Olivia looked confused. Ethan appeared skeptical. We followed the woman into the ballroom, where nearly 300 people had already taken their seats. A massive stage stood at the front of the room. Large screens displayed company branding alongside photographs of office buildings, hospitals, schools, and airports. I could hear conversations everywhere discussing contracts worth millions of dollars. My pulse quickened. This was no small operation. This was something enormous. We were seated directly beside several executives who greeted us warmly. One older gentleman shook my hand. "You must be Margaret. Walter speaks about you often." Before I could respond, the lights dimmed. The room gradually fell silent. A speaker stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone. He discussed growth, expansion, and a major announcement scheduled for the afternoon. Then he smiled toward the audience. "Before we begin, I would like to thank the man whose vision built this company from the ground up." A photograph appeared on the giant screen behind him. The moment I saw it, every question I had been carrying for months suddenly collided with reality. It was Walter, standing confidently beside company headquarters. The entire ballroom erupted into applause. For several seconds, nobody around me moved. The applause continued rolling through the ballroom while I sat frozen in my chair. On the giant screens, photographs appeared one after another. Walter standing beside newly completed office complexes. Walter shaking hands with city officials. Walter receiving community leadership awards. Walter visiting hospitals, schools, and public facilities supported by his company. The man my family had reduced to a job title the night before was being celebrated by hundreds of business leaders as the founder of a national organization. I slowly turned toward Olivia and Ethan. Their expressions mirrored my own shock, but there was something else there too. Confusion, embarrassment, disbelief. Charles stared at the stage with narrowed eyes as though he were trying to convince himself he had misunderstood what he was seeing. Then Walter walked onto the stage. The room immediately rose to its feet. Another wave of applause filled the ballroom. Yet Walter looked exactly the same as he always did. The same calm smile, the same steady posture, the same quiet confidence. He thanked everyone for attending and spoke briefly about the company's growth over the past 3 decades. He explained how the business began with a single cleaning contract and an old pickup truck. Over time, one client became 10. 10 became 100. Eventually, the company expanded into facility management services across multiple states. Listening to him, I finally understood why he had never been ashamed of the work he performed. He had built everything from the ground up. Every position inside the company mattered because he had personally done many of those jobs himself. Then Walter said something that made the room fall silent. Titles can impress people, he said, but character is what determines who you become. His eyes briefly moved across the audience. For just a moment, they settled on our row. I felt my chest tighten. He was not angry. He was not seeking revenge. He was simply telling the truth. After the presentation ended, executives and guests surrounded Walter. People waited to shake his hand. Others thanked him for opportunities he had created over the years. Several employees spoke about careers that had changed their lives. I watched from a distance while trying to reconcile this image with the man who still fixed things around my house and remembered every birthday in my family. Eventually, Walter made his way back to us. Ethan stood first. "Why did you never tell us?" he asked. Walter smiled politely. "You never asked." Ethan lowered his eyes. Olivia appeared equally uncomfortable. "We thought." She began before stopping. Walter spared her the embarrassment of finishing the sentence. "I know what you thought." Charles remained silent. For perhaps the first time in his life, he seemed unsure what to say. The confidence he displayed at dinner the previous night had disappeared completely. As conversations continued around us, another executive approached Walter carrying a folder. They exchanged a few words before the man handed him several documents. I noticed Charles suddenly paying close attention. Something had changed. The executive looked toward Charles briefly before returning his focus to Walter. Their discussion remained professional, but I could see tension forming in Charles's expression. Minutes later, Walter excused himself to speak privately with several board members. Charles immediately pulled out his phone. His face grew increasingly pale as he scrolled through emails. Whatever he was reading clearly disturbed him. For the first time all weekend, he looked worried, truly worried. At that moment, I sensed there was still more I did not know. Walter's success had already shattered the assumptions my family carried for years. But as I watched Charles staring at his phone with growing concern, I realized the biggest revelation of all had not happened yet. The ballroom slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the atmosphere around our family had changed completely. Conversations continued. Executives exchanged handshakes. Waitstaff moved between tables serving coffee and refreshments. Yet none of us seemed focused on any of it. Our attention remained fixed on Charles. Throughout the afternoon, he checked his phone repeatedly. Each new message appeared to deepen the concern on his face. The confident businessman who had spent years presenting himself as untouchable now looked distracted and uneasy. I had seen that expression only a few times during our marriage. It usually appeared when something was wrong financially. Around 4 o'clock, Walter returned from another meeting and joined us near a reception area overlooking the river. Snow drifted gently outside the tall glass windows. The city skyline reflected against the water below. Several executives greeted Walter as they passed. One of them stopped long enough to discuss what sounded like a pending acquisition. I was not trying to eavesdrop, but certain words were impossible to miss. Transition, consolidation, restructuring, ownership transfer. Then came a company name that immediately caught Charles's attention. His head lifted. His eyes narrowed. The executive quickly apologized for discussing business matters and walked away. Charles remained unusually quiet. A few minutes later, he approached Walter directly. "Can we talk?" he asked. Walter nodded. "Of course." The two men stepped a short distance away. They did not appear angry. Neither raised his voice. Yet something about the conversation felt important. I watched from across the room while Olivia and Ethan exchanged nervous glances. When the discussion ended, Charles looked stunned. Not embarrassed. Not irritated. Stunned. He returned slowly and sat down without speaking. Ethan immediately leaned forward. "Dad, what is going on?" Charles rubbed a hand across his face. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked toward Walter. "You own the investment group?" Walter simply nodded. Ethan frowned. Olivia appeared equally confused. I was confused too. Charles let out a slow breath. "The investment group that has been acquiring controlling interests in regional service companies." Again, Walter nodded. The silence that followed felt heavy. Finally, Charles looked down at the floor. My company is one of them. Olivia blinked. What does that mean? Charles hesitated before answering. It means the company I spent years building is struggling more than I allowed anyone to know. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. And the group Walter controls now holds significant influence over what happens next. Ethan stared at his father. You told us business was doing great. Charles gave a bitter laugh. I told everyone that. In that moment, pieces began falling into place. The expensive vacations. The constant need to impress people. The obsession with appearances. Much of it had been an attempt to maintain an image that no longer reflected reality. Walter remained respectful throughout the conversation. He never interrupted. He never corrected Charles. Most importantly, he never enjoyed the discomfort unfolding before him. That was what struck me most. The man who had every opportunity to embarrass Charles chose not to. Eventually, Charles looked directly at Walter. You knew who I was when we met. Yes, Walter replied. And you knew about my company? Yes. Charles shook his head slowly. Then why let me make a fool of myself? Walter's answer came without hesitation. Because I wanted to know how you treated people when you believed they had nothing to offer you. No one spoke after that. The truth settled over all of us. It was not Walter's success that exposed the problem. It was the fact that our family had judged him long before knowing anything about him. And now, sitting in a room full of people who respected him, we were finally being forced to confront that reality. When we finally left the conference center, the drive back felt completely different from the drive there. Earlier that afternoon, my family had walked into the building carrying assumptions. Now they carried something much heavier. Reality. Snow continued falling lightly as we traveled through the city streets. No one seemed interested in small talk. No one discussed Christmas plans or holiday dinners. The silence itself told the story. Olivia spent most of the drive staring out the passenger window. Ethan checked his phone repeatedly, but barely looked at the screen. Charles remained unusually quiet in the back seat. For years, I had watched him dominate every room he entered. Now he seemed lost in thought. When we arrived at Olivia's house, everyone gathered in the living room. The Christmas tree still sparkled in the corner. Wrapped gifts remained beneath the branches. Yet the cheerful holiday atmosphere felt distant compared to everything that had happened. Walter removed his coat and sat comfortably beside the fireplace. He looked exactly as he had the day before. Nothing about him had changed. The only thing that had changed was the way everyone else saw him. Olivia was the first to speak. Walter, I owe you an apology. Her voice sounded sincere, but also uncertain. I judged you before I knew anything about you. Walter nodded politely. Thank you. Ethan shifted in his chair. I did the same thing. He looked embarrassed. Honestly, I feel pretty foolish right now. Walter offered the same calm smile he always did. Most people make judgments. The important thing is whether they learn from them. His response was gracious. Too gracious, perhaps. Because as I watched my children apologize, something unexpected happened inside me. Instead of feeling relieved, I felt disappointed. Not in Walter. In them. Their apologies only arrived after they discovered his success. Not after witnessing his kindness. Not after seeing how respectfully he treated people. Not after watching him endure ridicule without responding in kind. The timing mattered. And for the first time, I stopped making excuses for it. Later that evening, while Olivia prepared coffee in the kitchen, she pulled me aside. Mom, why didn't you tell us? She asked quietly. Tell you what? Who Walter really was. I looked at her carefully. I did tell you who he was. She frowned. You know what I mean. I shook my head. No, Olivia. I told you exactly who he was. I told you he was kind, honest, reliable, generous. You were the one who decided those qualities were less important than a job title. She lowered her eyes. I could see the truth landing. It was uncomfortable, but it needed to be said. Across the room, Ethan had begun asking Walter questions about business. Charles occasionally joined the conversation. The dynamic had shifted dramatically. 24 hours earlier, they barely respected him. Now they hung on his answers. Walter remained polite, but I noticed something subtle. He never changed his behavior toward them. He treated them with the same courtesy he had shown before they learned the truth. That consistency revealed more about his character than any financial success ever could. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself sitting beside Walter near the Christmas tree. The lights reflected softly across the room. You handled all of this better than I would have, I admitted. He chuckled softly. People reveal themselves when they think status matters. Sometimes you learn more from being underestimated than from being admired. I leaned against his shoulder and watched my family from across the room. They were finally beginning to see him clearly. The question now was whether they would also be willing to see themselves clearly. Because Walter's success had exposed something far more important than a hidden business empire. It had exposed the values that had quietly shaped our family for years. And confronting those truths was only beginning. The following week brought a quiet kind of clarity that I had not experienced in years. Christmas decorations slowly came down across the city. Snow melted from sidewalks. Life began returning to its normal rhythm. Yet something fundamental had changed inside me. For so long, I had measured family harmony by how much discomfort I was willing to ignore. I excused hurtful comments. I overlooked arrogance. I convinced myself that keeping the peace mattered more than confronting the truth. Walter helped me see things differently. One afternoon, just after New Year's Day, Charles asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost declined. Then I realized there was no reason to avoid the conversation. We met at a small cafe near the river. The man who sat across from me looked older than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence he had carried for decades seemed diminished. After a few minutes of awkward conversation, he finally sighed. I owe you an apology. I listened quietly. Not just for Christmas, he continued. For a lot of things. Hearing those words surprised me. During our marriage, apologies had never come easily to Charles. He stared down at his coffee. I spent years teaching the kids to value success the wrong way. I thought money solved everything. I thought status earned respect. Somewhere along the way, I stopped paying attention to character. I appreciated the honesty, but something inside me remained calm. There was no anger left to release. No score to settle. We all make mistakes, I said. What matters is what we learn from them. Charles nodded slowly. Then he surprised me again. Walter is a better man than I gave him credit for. I smiled. Yes, he is. A few days later, Olivia and Ethan visited my house together. They brought lunch and stayed most of the afternoon. At first, the conversation felt uncomfortable. They both seemed unsure how to address everything that had happened. Finally, Ethan spoke. Mom, I keep thinking about that night. Olivia nodded. Me too. I waited. The worst part is not that we were wrong about Walter, Olivia said quietly. The worst part is realizing how quickly we judged him. For the first time, their apologies felt different. Not because they were embarrassed. Not because they were impressed by Walter's success. But because they genuinely understood what they had done. That realization mattered more than any apology. As winter moved forward, our family slowly began rebuilding relationships on healthier ground. Not perfect ground. Healthier ground. There is a difference. Walter never lectured anyone. He never reminded people of their mistakes. He simply continued being himself. The same man who treated executives and janitors with equal respect. The same man who valued character over image. The same man who never needed to prove his worth because he already knew it. One evening, several months later, Walter and I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. I thought about everything that had happened since Christmas. The humiliation, the revelations, the uncomfortable truths. Then I thought about the lesson hidden beneath it all. People often reveal who they are when they believe someone has nothing to offer them. That Christmas, my family believed Walter was ordinary. They believed he lacked status. They believed he could do nothing for them. Their reactions revealed far more about themselves than they ever revealed about him. I slipped my hand into Walter's and smiled. The greatest gift he gave me was never his success. It was perspective. He reminded me that dignity does not come from wealth. Respect does not come from titles. And the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who recognize your value long before they discover your accomplishments. In the end, the man they underestimated turned out to be exactly who he claimed to be from the very beginning. And that was worth more than anything money could buy.